but based on that, I think I'm fairly qualified to speak today on the subject of data is simple. Data, or information, especially facts and numbers, collected to support decision making. This is a definition that's fairly understood by a lot of people. Cambridge Dictionary defines it as pretty much that. And today I want to tell a few stories in order to get across the simplicity of data and also the power of data when used properly. So in order to go back a little bit in terms of what data is and how it's evolved into what it is today, I'm going to talk about someone who was born over 200 years ago, a man called John Snow. And John Snow was born in England, in York, in 1813, to a family whose father was a coal miner and later became a farmer. And he was a fairly straightforward family. They had 9 children, and John was the first child in the family. When he started going to school, he became fairly good in a lot of subject areas in school, and he excelled in a lot of things. But he was quite a normal person growing up. But later on in life, he became someone who was extremely important in lots of different ways, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. This is a picture of John Snow in his prime, let's say, and this is going back over 200 years ago. And John Snow, as he grew up, he became a physician, and he had a real interest in healthcare and looking after people and studying things like germs and so on. He was a fairly smart man, and he was really interested in medication and medical advancement. So in the year 1854, there was a massive occurrence of cholera. There was an outbreak in London, Soho to be specific. And John Snow was around 32 at the time, his early 30s. And he took upon himself to actually analyse what was going on and why the outbreak was so rife in the Soho area in terms of cholera. There was lots of deaths, there was lots of things going on. So what he did was, he was a real pioneer in the sense that he took the information that he could gather from speaking to people, from assessing the information available to him. And we have to remember that back then there was no digital information. This is all conversations. There was paper. So what John Snow did was he drew a map of the focus area where the majority of deaths were happening in terms of cholera in Soho. And the map, you'll see on the screen here, was fairly clear in terms of what it was the area of focus for him, which is where most of the deaths were occurring. But what he did was he overlaid these lines onto the map that he drew. And each of these lines indicates a death that occurred. And what that did was, it was able to give him an insight into this plague that was occurring. And what it allowed him to do was to acquire the data from speaking to people and to effectively analyze that data and turn it into an action. And what I mean by that is that in 1854, what he did was he looked at who was dying, where and when. And he was able to collect all of that information, very simple information. There was no real complex data here. You're talking about a person, a time, and a location. That's all. And what he was able to do was, using his map, this is a newer version of the map, but effectively it's the same thing. He was able to analyze that data to identify meaning. And what he understood out of this data was, there's a cluster within the center of the map that was indicating that a lot of deaths was occurring around the same location. Now, there was a lot of outliers, as you can see. So that meant that he had to go a bit deeper in his analysis and speak to people that had relatives that had died outside of his area of focus. But when he spoke to those people, they all came back with the same information. John had never believed the core reason for the cholera outbreak was airborne germs, which was the common belief at the time. He understood it to be something different, and he had an interest in finding out. He spoke to people. The outliers, in fact, it turned out, all had something in common. They were outside of the area and had died, but in fact they'd been drinking from the same water pump, which was the water pump on Broad Street in Soho, which most of the deaths were occurring around. So even the ones that were outside of that, when he spoke to the families of the people that had died, they were saying, well, actually, we used to go and get the water from that pump to give him because he felt it tasted better. And this was all building up a picture for John Snow. So he was able to gather enough evidence out of this simple data that he'd plotted using a dot map in order to convince the local authority in relation to the water treatment and waste in the area that the water pump could be the potential cause of the outbreak. So lo and behold, what happened next was that based on his evidence, not his opinion, on the data he presented to the government officials, they removed the handle from the water pump. And almost immediately, the spread ceased. So on further analysis later on, in years to come, John died a few years later without actually being recognized formally for stopping this. It was only later that people actually formally recognized him, and there was a couple of reasons for that. One being that the water pump led to a tank that was built very close to a sewage tank from a house. And what had happened was sewage had leaked into the water and contaminated the water within the tank that the pump was connected to. And this is how it spread. That's now a fact. So from John's simple actions of taking the data, plotting it onto a map, and analysing it, and actually getting an action out of that to happen, he effectively not only saved lots and lots of lives, so there's 616 deaths recorded during that time, and it wasn't peaked at that stage, but he actually went on to fundamentally force governments across the world, not just in London, not just in Soho, but across the world, to review their wastewater treatment and their water supplies generally. So in effect, he's actually affected all of us, because now we're healthier and have a better water supply available to us because of the actions he took. So it's fantastic to see that, when we talk about data and the simplicity of it, that's a really simple example of how simple data can lead to innovation and change and insight. So the key point I'm trying to make here is that data, when used properly, becomes knowledge, which is what he gained. He acquired this information and he analysed it to acquire the knowledge that actually the pump could be the cause here, and it probably is. So it turned into something that people could believe. And when he applied that knowledge properly, it was turned into an insight that it is actually the issue, and the action followed on from that. And this is not that much different to what we do today, or what we should do today as people within business or organizations, whatever area we work in. I put this up on Twitter and LinkedIn yesterday in terms of, did anyone have an idea of what a battery meant in terms of the context of this talk today? So I thought that this might be a good visual cue to break this down very simply so that people can understand the concept and the steps involved. So what I've done is AAA is really what I'm saying here, or AAA, or I'm from Dublin, so I would say A. But it's the A in the first instance is the acquisition of data. So acquiring data from whatever sources you have available. Analysing that data together and relating it together has real power, because then you're looking at things on a full picture of the world, let's say. And then you have an action. So it's not that complex. There's 3 steps involved. Now this is going back to 1854. This is the exact way that John Snow applied his data. So what's changed today? We still have a lot of the same methodologies applied. Actually, we'll talk a bit later about some companies haven't really moved on from that. But now we have lots more capability because we have technology and we have systems. Back in his day, there was only paper, there was only conversations and people, there was very little. There wasn't a car. Cars hadn't been invented. The digital or technology revolution hadn't occurred. The industrial revolution hadn't occurred. So it's the same principles, really, with an extra one. So we have the ability to acquire data. We can analyze data. We can action data, just like John Snow did, except we're replacing his paper with spreadsheets in some cases. So this could be you, or it could be your organization or organizations out there. But a lot of people are missing this point here, the automation of this stuff. We have technology to support automation of all of these things. We don't need to do the manual steps anymore. Why would we? When we have technology, we have digital systems to support what we do and to automate this stuff for us to get real power and benefits. So if we look at what's changed, The process in 2008 is all around automation analytics, or it should be. If you work in an organization where you're doing a lot of manual handling of data and processing of data, you're missing a trick. Data is still simple. It's so simple that we can automate a lot of the things that we do with data. So my message today really is understand that. So same 3 steps to start and then automate the process. So there's lots of technology out there to help you to do this. It's not difficult. It's not expensive. The term analytics, I wanted to bring this up here because people, when I talk about data as simple, analytics can sometimes be seen as complex. It's not. It's just the same stuff. You know, it's got a different name. You can go into, actually, you'll have heard this before, but it's very easy to make something complicated, and it can be sometimes difficult to keep something simple. But the power in keeping things simple is phenomenal, because then people can understand it easily and apply it easily, and that's when the true benefits come. So analytics is just a term. There's a lot of things beyond acquiring data, analyzing data, and actioning data, and automating it. You can talk about machine learning, AI, and all that stuff, but this is the fundamentals. If you have this right, you're going in the right direction, and you've got a good foundation. So I'm touching on what's changed in terms of back in the 1800s. You know, since then, the Industrial Revolution has happened, digital revolution has happened. Everyone has an iPad, everyone has a mobile device. Back then, there was none of that. The amount of information we have available to us through the internet is just phenomenal. It's not worth thinking about. Whereas when we look at what people were able to achieve back in the times without that data, it's amazing. So what we should be able to achieve today, why are we still using spreadsheets to analyze data manually? That's what they did 200 years ago, except it was on paper. When you think of that, it boggles the mind a bit, because there's so many better ways to do things. Still in a simple way, and still using the same processes of acquisition of data, the analysis of data, and actioning data. But why would we do that manually when we can do it digitally or automate these things? You know, in business today, the leading companies are using technology that enables them to be data-driven. And that's the core of success in the digital transformation that's happened over the past couple of decades, at least, and beyond. So digital adoption has become rife. Companies are using it a lot. Mobile anywhere, data anywhere, access anywhere. So you can access information from anywhere in any form. In some cases, nothing has changed. So the AAA process still exists. The acquisition of data needs to happen, the analysis needs to happen, and then actions need to come out at. But it can be automated, so it's supported by that. There is a slow transformation from the old to the new, let's call it. It's not new, but it's new. Some companies are still doing things in old ways that it's costing them time and it's costing them money. Atlantis, I mentioned I'm Chief Data Officer at Atlantis, and my role at Atlantis is really to ensure that we're applying innovation to be at the forefront of data leadership in terms of how software can simplify the use of data, management of data, collaboration of people with data, and so on. And we use analytics around that. But our core is that we provide a unique data platform using something we built to enable organizations not just to discover and analyze data, visualize data, but optimize the data within their organization. And we do it in the exact same way that I described earlier. So it's not rocket science. There's this term of data science. We incorporate data science, and I've one thing to say about data science that we'll see in a second. But it's the same thing. You can see, you know, our platform takes any data inputs, whether it's a web API or a spreadsheet or a database connection to SAP or Salesforce or whatever it might be. It takes that raw data and turns it into information, which is something that can be interpreted and understood, and it connects it together. So you can find correlations between things, or consolidate data about a customer, for example, to use a simple example. Turn it into knowledge that becomes insight, effectively. And it's all based on the AAA plus methodology, if we call it that, which is the acquisition of the data, the analysis of that data, actioning the data, all wrapped in an automation process. So the manual effort is reduced substantially. There's no build. Our platform that we have is self-service for business users. It's not involving IT people to build and do development projects. So it takes that away and it simplifies everything to do with data, which is key because this is the new world and it's taken that to a new level. These are the type of things we do and our customers do. Simple to use. I keep coming back to that word simple, and that's a key thing to me in anything I do from a digital point of view. If I'm using apps and stuff, the ones that are simple, I'll use all the time. Anything that takes a bit more thinking than it should for me, I don't really persist with. Something that's very interactive and responds, that's what we've got. It's device independent, and that's key. You know, tablets, Android, Apple, doesn't matter. Phones, smartphones, tablets, laptops, whatever it is, it can be accessed on that device. Trends, you know, this isn't new. This is the analysis piece becoming visual. Looking at trends within data. Again, we're using those 3 A's, the acquisition, the analysis. The analysis has become visualization in some ways, or monitoring changes in data in order to have embedded actions that come out of that. And that's all trending. So embedding early warnings is a key part of our platform that we enable organizations to have automated actions based on changes within the data. So we work with a partner of ours who look after housing authorities, and they have our platform embedded in theirs, which means that all of the tenants that are paying them rent, there's a big change, for instance, in the UK going to universal credit, which it means that tenants will no longer have their rent paid for them. They'll be given the money to pay their landlord. There's a huge potential issue there in terms of people not paying their landlord and spending the money, potentially. So having early warnings in place for the organizations that are ultimately responsible for their own tenants is important. This person has a propensity to pay or a scoring around their payment that's low. They're a risk in terms of going into arrears. So it's that sort of thing to communicate with people quickly, early, through any sort of communication device. It's very simple. It's easy to use. I did say I was going to touch on this, but I'm not going to make it complicated. Predictive analytics. The use of historical data to predict the future. That's it. No simpler, no more complex than that. Taking your historical information to predict future events based on what has occurred in the past. Is this applicable to everything? Is it the best way to approach things? It'll give something. But you can look at the scenario here with this turkey coming up to December thinking that this is great, I'm gaining weight, I'm gaining weight, I'm gaining weight. It's just going to continue. We all know a bit more than that because we have more information. We're not just looking at a linear, set of data. If that turkey had other information, such as these guys over here, this is trying to convey, by the way, the difference potentially between predictive analytics on its own and data science, which is a broader area. Data science takes into account a lot more than that. It'll use machine learning and it'll bring in a source of data that's not just the historical data, so real-time information, data from external inputs outside the organization. So these guys know that gravy and turkey stuffing sales are going through the roof, so they're worried. This guy is not worried. These three are really worried because they have more information, they're using it properly. And that could be seen as data science. Doesn't have to be complex, it's still the same simplicity terms, but it's an interesting differentiator between the two. To summarize, I just want to say that it's really, to me, I mentioned it before, that keeping things simple is sometimes difficult, but the benefits of doing that are just amazing in terms of the organization's understanding of their data, the interpretation of the data, and the common power that comes from that, and everyone being empowered by the ability to use data effectively. So that's really the core point in this talk. And if anyone has any questions, we're just outside the door on the right-hand side. We have a stand. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you like what I've talked about today, then please follow us using Glantis Limited, either the @ or hashtag. And it's been a pleasure to speak today, and I hope that somebody has got something out of it. So thank you very much for your time this morning.